Hello and welcome to the Gluten-Free Psychiatry Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Daniel Williams. This is episode 25, and today we're discussing biblical psychiatry from the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm talking about how we approach mainstream psychiatry from people that have several different religions. How does one person do that? Similar to a chaplain in the Army that I'm familiar with, they would put on services for different types of things, and I see as I get into healing that this topic is needed to cover a broader range of things, because the truth is every corner of the globe has ancient healing practices, and they can't be separated from mental health. If you watch the rest of my podcast, you'll understand. So I wanted to give a little background and some history because a lot of people don't read this stuff anymore. That's what the research says. But it matters in the field of psychiatry for something called a religious and spiritual problem. Back in 1994, the American Psychiatric Association came out with its latest diagnostic book, the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual version 4, DSM-4, came out in 94. And that one was the first one to give this V code classification diagnosis. It's V62.89 to signify a religious or spiritual problem a patient might have. And what this did was it made it a possibility to diagnose a spiritual problem. It also could make the other side happen where you got a spiritual problem and we're pathologizing and diagnosing a mental health illness. And first do no harm, the primum non nocere, it comes into play here as a physician who took the Hippocratic Oath in 2003. I don't want to diagnose a psychiatric problem like psychosis for someone who's having a spiritual experience. And if you look at the photo of the show notes for this one, you'll see a picture of the part of the face of Jesus. It comes from a painting by a Russian painter by the name of Akiana. Check out the book, Heaven is for Real, if you are interested in Christianity or Judeo-Christian viewpoint at all. If it interests you, it's very interesting that two different children had the same view of Jesus while they had paranormal or out-of-body experiences. They had the same view, and one is a Russian artist that painted that picture. So it led some authenticity to what he might actually look like. And I checked her website recently. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. That she's painted other views of this now. When she was young, about 8 years old or something, she painted this enormous canvas of his face. So I digress. Let's get on to the religious and spiritual problems. So why do I say the Dead Sea Scrolls? Why include so many religions? The reason is because there are over 4 billion different believers in some aspect of those religions that came from the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's more than half the world's population. That's why. So when I'm talking about religion, if you hear me mention the name of Jesus, modern culture in the West has been pushed by the top down and all the agencies, all the AI, the filtration and the monitoring of all of us, to have us all very programmed out of Hollywood to say the name Jesus Christ in all of the movies. They've got everybody programmed to say that at a moment of curse, at a moment when life is unacceptably horrible and it's just a huge complaint and Jesus Christ, what the hell? Like that is actually the meaning and intent in all this Hollywood stuff. In a couple episodes, we're going to cover MK Ultra, and we're going to cover a couple of government agencies in a row here coming up. So there's some history and background to this that's interesting. I just know as an individual to be respectful. Don't say Jesus Christ if millions of people love him and you're using that as a curse. I mean, no one thinks about this. So there's a lot of curses and a lot of history been swept under the rug. So we're going to expose some of that right now. Okay? Loving people and everything. Even if, like when I worked in the emergency room, I saw a trauma and the person died. And there's no way to say that was good. I have to let that situation go also with love. I found that out in the basic training class for One Light Healing Touch. And just today, I finished the first of 2 weekends in the master's class for One Light Healing Touch. So I'm becoming quite a good energy healer, and I have done prayer and helped people with illnesses and things when I was as young as 20 years old for about a year, I went to a church that talked about the Holy Spirit. So I've got a little bit of background. If you care to know more about my background, I've got it at the end of the blog post show notes here, out of the way. I won't be mentioning my perspective again, because the point is, they often say don't mention your religious experience at all in the field of psychiatry. But I think if I can read through table 1 here for you in this podcast about how many different religions come from the same roots, you'll see why it's okay to talk about it. So in a sense, this would be sensitivity, cultural sensitivity training, if you will. All right, that's what we're going for here. So that's an important part of healing, is that you release everyone with peace and love. And there are religions, at least 2 that I know of, that actively and intentionally, willfully promote hate. Hate from in the womb. Not even knee-high. Children are programmed with hate in different religions. And some of them with love, and the wrong kind of love, if you know what I mean. So there's a lot of conspiracies coming out. We'll cover conspiracy therapy in more detail in the future. But that said, I'm just going to talk about the scriptures now and what they say and what religions are tied to them. So let me jump to table 1. And this is the Dead Sea Scrolls affect multiple religions and cultures, and some with effective healing traditions. I've got an asterisk here. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of these religions have ancient healing practices. That's why this matters for psychiatry. Okay, and if we look up how many they are and we add them up, it's more than half the world's population. And here's how I get there. Okay, the Jewish population. That's the culture, heritage, and religion. Whether they're actively practicing or not, that's their cultural heritage. You can't take that away from them. That's 15.7 million people. On my table, I've got the links to the sources. I know these numbers aren't perfect. They're outdated usually by at least a year. And I'm putting numbers from different years. None of these surveys come from the same place. So it's not perfect, but it gives you an idea that we're close to 7 billion in the world. And we've got Protestants. Protestants are all the Christians. And it doesn't have to be Episcopalian or Southern Baptist to be a Protestant. It's anyone that believes the Old and New Testament. If you combine the 2 books, a regular Bible is a Protestant. Because the Jewish book is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. And then you have the books of the kings and the prophets. And that's the thick, boring part that's hard for most people to read. But there's great stuff in the middle of it, like Beth's Moore Book of Daniel study. Check that out. I've got links to that here in the show notes. It's fascinating to see how dreams and visions are given by God to tell of things that are going to come in the future. And it's ongoing today. So Beth Moore, Book of Daniel. She has other ones like David and other books that she did, but Daniel is the best introduction to prophecy if you want to see how prophecy takes place over thousands of years. That's a jump start. It's hard to keep up with, but she's a great teacher. It's engaging and fun, approachable, and be great for a Bible study or something in your home if you're curious, no matter which religion you are, because that's coming from the Book of Daniel. So that's direct lineage from the Jewish tradition. They've got the names from, from Adam and Eve. You got all the way to Abraham and all the way down to Jesus listed out in the Old Testament ahead of time. And so a lot of these things are prophecies foretold of future generations and families, down to names and cities and things like that were told in advance. And so those parts aren't covered in the Book of Daniel, but some of the interesting stuff is with the archangels, and that comes up in healing. So that's another reason I include it here, because I do a master's class and other programs with people from different religions and cults, and literally leaders of the different religions sometimes that maybe give medicines or hallucinogenics, or the ayahuasca church, for example, is going to be the first in the United States to get approved to give hallucinogens at a church as part of the religion. Giving a controlled substance drug at church is becoming legal. So the government takes everything away, right? Like all the nutrition from the plant, and try to sell it back to you in the form of a pill or a religion or an expensive, dangerous procedure with a hallucinogen that could put you in prison or the dead or the hospital, right? It's happening. Not necessarily in the churches and with or inexperienced people, but there's a risk when you take hallucinogens. And then the Catholics did something different. Back to our table 1 here. The Catholics said, oh, we'll take the Old New Testament, but there were some other books inside of the Dead Sea Scrolls that didn't make it into the Bible. So the Bible that you're familiar with, the Old and New Testament, is called the Canon, C-A-N-O-N. It's 66 books put together that are internally consistent. And it takes years to understand. This happened 2,000 years ago, and it's spread out over 1,500 years at least. And so we're talking about at least 3,500 years of human history has to be translated. This is not a YouTube video conversation. If you got your information from a short YouTube video, there's no way you would understand how the Bible relates to each other. It takes many years, probably at least 5 or 10, of study Bibles and Bible studies to get all your questions answered. But it's worth it, and that's why you're supposed to do this as a child, so you can watch how prophecy in the allegorical puzzles of Proverbs and Psalms come true in life, because eventually you won't be able to get away from it. You'll see that kind of stuff everywhere. And so earlier in life you study that, the better. But so the Catholics grabbed some of the other documents that didn't make it in there. They had things that are internally inconsistent, like things that disagreed with the Bible did not get included. And so those are called esoteric documents. They're esoteric, a little bit like mixing existential with healing. So it is still a healing approach that works. And the canon, the Bible itself, does discuss that there were other religions and people and to stay away from them. Okay? And what could happen if you work with them. So I've got some references here. If you'll go and look at the different Bibles that are not affected by the evil King James, there's a disclaimer. The King James Bible that's so popular is, first of all, written for 12th graders in high school. And the new King James has been dumbed down to the 7th grade level, 7th or 8th. And so that's the trend of education, is to pull it away from people. But King James himself had several, like about 150 different rules he told the translators to work with. So when they published the King James Bible, there was a very embarrassing preface, a disclaimer by the translator saying, hey, we were forced to do this in a certain way. I wouldn't necessarily trust all of it. Why would you write 11-page disclaimer if it was natural and authentic in a simple, pure translation? No other Bible has an 11-page disclaimer. And that's our primary one that the Southern Baptists hook on. And guess what? It does things like leave out the Holy Spirit and to try to disguise in some of the language that the religious leaders themselves are actually demons. Okay? There's some twisted stuff in there. It's not proven. People will call it conspiracy. But when you look at the whole canon of the rest of the allegorical speech and you watch what's happening today on social media, you're like, could that be happening? Could a prophecy be taking place in front of all the people so that one day when we get to the magic computer monitor, watch the playback, we'll see how all the dots connect in a future version of ourselves? Very interesting. So the esoterics believe different things like that, like the Akashic records that houses all the body of information, of knowledge of everybody's thoughts and deeds throughout all of history. So there are other versions that believe that there's a reckoning or accounting or a way to go and get your whole story and your whole message of everything that's ever happened to you, besides just the Christians that think that there's a judgment day, right? So that's interesting. When you bring in the esoterics and you compare the teaching healing principles and you add that to psychiatry, now we're looking at a much broader view. It doesn't matter to me as a psychiatrist which one of these things you believe. I just care that you want to live a healthy lifestyle and live in peace going forward. You can come from a religion of hate. In fact, that's why I'm doing this podcast, is to invite you to heal, to stop that, to turn away from wicked things that involve hurting other people. That's not the way. That's not the method. And the science will prove that. So stick to the podcast. If you disagree with me, please stick to the podcast and hear me out. I introduced this to focus only on these Dead Sea Scrolls today, but I'm building blocks here, and I'll get to more custom, unique ways that people from all these religions can access healing and relief from panic attacks and nightmares, trauma and grief on both sides of the war, people. That's what I'm saying. both sides of the war. And let me give you an example of that from my own story. I wasn't planning on doing this, but the Vietnam War affected my family. My dad came back as Rambo and a bunch of shit happened. Okay? It was bad. I got traumatized. Here we are. I left out some other traumas. But it's part of my healing journey that now my father's alive and doing well. My brother's worked for 3 agencies himself, is still working in the field. And between the 3 of us, we have a family of service, 6 different agencies between the 3 of us. But it was the Vietnam, the specific torturous deaths and trauma my dad saw in Vietnam that made him the way he was. I believe it led to mental illness and other kinds of things like that. Combined with the consequence of his own behavior and losing me at the age of 8 and my brother, my younger brother. So that pain and agony and death of war and the permanent ripple that has in the family directly affects me on a daily basis. A daily basis. That's my story. And yet I don't want to leave this planet in hate or resentment. So here about a week ago, I had a veteran I was doing a disability evaluation for. He had a claim with the VA, and I was doing the mental health appointment. I'm happy to do your mental health appointments, and I'll do a podcast quick shout out. We got great news that I'm the first ever to get approved a service connection disability from Agent Orange causing dementia, causing depression from the dementia. No medical records till the end of life got dementia and got depression from it. 2 years. That's it. 100% service connection. First ever. For the article I wrote, go back a few podcast episodes. I published the article. Please share that. That's a great example of healing. And so guess what? This veteran I'm talking about, I saw last week, guess where he's from? Vietnam. He's a Vietnamese national. Southern Vietnam. Those were our allies, and came to America. And so the same pain he saw his family do is also very interesting because I told him I would look it up, and here it is. What are the ancient practices from Vietnam? So instead of me getting hateful, angry, and resentful and wanting to go kill people from North Vietnam and China that we were fighting against because of the pain and anguish it cost me in my life and my family and the people I miss and the people that aren't here over it. Secondary, tertiary consequences from war when you bring that stuff home and you haven't taken it out of the body and you don't know how to heal and you haven't cleared it yet. You're dangerous and you scare the hell out of your children and you abuse your wives and it's not right. And once you know the energy healing, you'll be able to to man up the way you're trying to. So part of my new curriculum has something in it called the Prince Charming Challenge. So stay tuned. I've got answers for all that. If any of that relates to you, I'm trying to demonstrate there was pain and war in my life too. And I'm listing Dead Sea Scrolls religions that are at war with each other, some of them, right? The Jewish and the Islams. And how do I get to Islam on here? Islam, even though the Mecca and Medina books were written in something like 300 and 700 AD, wouldn't say AD to them, Anno Domini, the year of our Lord. I grew up in the AD system, so I still use that. But back in the book of Genesis, they have a shared common history up until, I think it's Genesis 23, that Esau and Jacob had their split. And Esau ran and hid in the mountains, in the rocks, a fortress of Petra for many years, lived out his life there. And Jacob became the nation of Israel, and Esau became the Palestinians, who became the religion of Islam. And so they were twins in the womb. And that's the prophecy, that they would fight until the end of days. And that's still what's happening. So if you believe the prophecies, there will be no peace in the Middle East until Jesus comes back. If you don't, then you're at odds with each other, still fighting this war. So there's 3 viewpoints right there around the same documents that were found to be archaeologically valid, which means if you would put the books of the Bible in chronological order and not have them dumbed down and watered down and the history lost in the resorting of the books, then you would miss the fact that hundreds of prophecies have come true. Many are happening now, and some haven't happened in the future yet. And it just keeps getting worse until it gets better. That's the bottom line. So that's why I include Islam there, because don't forget that Esau and Jacob were twins in the womb, and they were fighting in the womb. Yeah, go back and read that. It's fascinating. I included the Luciferians and the Satanists here because they worship the father of lies. We don't know exactly how many they are. What we know is they have a sworn secret society, and there you go. More on that later. But that's very related. Why? They do have their own Bible, but Satan's very much mentioned in the actual Bible, the Christian Bible, the Jewish Bible, relates to evil, in the garden. Anything that refers to the book of Genesis, is involved, the Luciferians and the Satanists. So there's a connection between Satanists and Muslims because their characters that they follow are in the same book. That's why I'm approaching this from a psychiatric perspective. It doesn't matter to me which one of those things you believe. I've helped patients on all sides of the issues with each of these religions. And fascinating enough to me, and ought to get your attention, is that all of the Satanists that I have either sponsored or been their psychiatrist for, all of them knew this quantum telepathic type of communication and stuff that I know about, that I teach now. And my Southern Baptist friends might cringe at that and say, there's some evil, wicked voodoo stuff. You shouldn't even talk about that. I've been told not to even say the word yoga in a church by a pastor before because it invokes spirits. Yeah, maybe you're as scared of spiritual warfare. I don't know. But I'm figuring some of this out on my own. We're all learning in different orders. I'm not trying to criticize my church, but I'll say it's been a few years since I've been able to set foot in the door, and I need to find one that fits my newer viewpoint of the healing phase I'm in my life now. So if you're wanting to make a change, I can help you. If you have religious abuse, if you have a spiritual problem, if your guilt is because you didn't live the way God wanted you to, and you believed a certain thing like I have multiple times over, and you made a mistake, which is just a decision that you wanted to do at the time that later came back to hurt you. If you've had any of those related to spirituality, I can help you. And if I also put the anti-Semites on my list, people that are against the Jews, that's 2.2 billion people estimated. That's a lot of programming. And most of them are the Muslims, but there's a lot of them that aren't. And so there's a link to the article there where I got that number. So I'm not double counting Islam and anti-Semites in my figure. I left out counting the anti-Semites when I added up 4 billion people here. There's 4 billion-ish. More than half of the world's population believes in some element of the Dead Sea Scrolls, not counting that figure of the anti-Semites. Okay? But if there's 2.2 billion people against the Jews, they might be doing something right. Right? One of them's wrong. One of them's wrong. We can't both be right. Maybe they're both wrong. See? So I have that mental flexibility where I don't have an ownership. The only thing is the hate speech. I don't do any of that. So I've got my past on there written in it. And Satanism is the unspoken religion, at least at Harvard. I've got a list of a great course that they take there, and it'll teach you all these religions, and they leave that one out. And so we'll have more on that later. But for now, just be advised that it's possible to get psychiatric care with religious problems today. The problem is that you're not going to have a psychiatrist that knows anything about them. They're only going to know their limited viewpoints. And I only know my limited viewpoints. Maybe this list is more than average. In my experience, it's a lot more than average. I do have pretty deep knowledge of the Bible. I have taught a grief and bereavement Bible study at a church, and we went through all the scriptures. I've got the notes on that, and it plans to be included in a future community coming soon. So there's a lot more to be covered. If I can help you with any religious or spiritual problem, please just reach out to mindshiftcare.com. This has been the Gluten-Free Psychiatry Podcast. Have a great day.